The morning of the biggest night of my career, our delivery driver sent me a text that changed everything. Not a call, a text. 3 lines. Don't go inside yet. I'm in the parking lot on the east side. You need to hear something before you walk through those doors. His name is Marcus. He's been driving for our company for 9 years. He knew my grandmother before I did, used to haul flour deliveries to her original bakery on Tuesdays when I was still in college, writing papers about brand strategy I'd never actually used. When she passed and left me a struggling 3-location bakery chain with outstanding debt and a leaking roof at the flagship store, Marcus was the first one who showed up the next morning, keys in hand, asking what time the first delivery needed to go out. I almost didn't text him back. I was standing outside the venue in heels I'd worn for exactly 40 minutes and already regretted, holding a clutch that matched nothing, watching caterers wheel in towers of Petit Fours we'd spent 3 weeks designing. The Hartwell grand reopening. 5 years of work. A complete brand overhaul. 3 new locations. A catering partnership with 2 hotel groups and a features placement in food and wine that had taken me 18 months to land. Tonight was the night we introduced the new ownership structure to investors, press, and our top wholesale clients. My husband had been talking about this night for months. Our night, he called it. I texted Marcus back. East lot? I'll come to you. He was parked in the 3rd spot from the end, engine off, window down despite the October chill. When I got in the passenger seat, he didn't say anything right away. Just reached into the center console and handed me a set of wireless earbuds still in the case. The cheap drugstore kind, not mine. I recorded something, he said. You need to listen to the whole thing. Don't say anything until it's done. I looked at him. Marcus is not a dramatic person. In 9 years, I have never heard him exaggerate a situation, complain about traffic, or say a bad word about anyone who worked in that building. He once drove through a flooded street at 4 a.m. to get a wedding cake order to a venue on time without telling anyone. He just showed up with the cake, soaking wet, and left. How long? I asked. 11 minutes. I put the earbuds in. What I heard was a phone call, not a conversation. He'd been part of a conversation that had happened near him while he was loading the van in the back corridor of our main kitchen 2 days ago. He told me later he'd hit record the moment he heard my husband's voice, some instinct he couldn't explain, something in the tone. He'd stood completely still behind the van for 11 minutes, phone recording through his shirt pocket. The call was between my husband and his mother. My mother-in-law has never liked me. She made that clear the first Thanksgiving I spent with her family, when she referred to my grandmother's bakery as that little bread shop and asked my husband, loudly, whether I planned to keep running it as a hobby or actually do something with my business degree. When I turned it into a regional brand with 14 employees and 7-figure annual revenue, she stopped calling it a hobby. She started calling it a family business. The distinction mattered more than I understood at the time. On the recording, her voice was calm, organized, like she'd rehearsed it. The equity transfer goes through tonight, she said. Richard already filed the amended operating agreement this morning. My husband's voice. She'll figure it out eventually. By then it's done. The announcement frames it as a strategic evolution. She stays on as creative director. A pause. Then, she won't like that. She doesn't need to like it. She needs to keep baking. I sat in that parking lot and listened to my mother-in-law describe how my husband had filed documents transferring controlling equity of the company I rebuilt from bankruptcy to a family holding LLC, one that included him, her, and his brother, without my knowledge. Using a restructuring agreement I had signed 14 months ago. I remembered signing it. We were in the kitchen at home. Late, maybe 11 o'clock. He'd slid a folder across the counter and explained it while I was finishing inventory reports. Tax optimization, he said. A restructuring to protect the assets in case of litigation from suppliers. He worked in commercial real estate. He understood this language better than I did. He was patient, calm, and completely convincing. I signed in 3 places and went back to my inventory. I had not read past the first page. She trusts you completely, my mother-in-law said on the recording. There was something in her voice I couldn't quite name. Not cruelty exactly, more like satisfaction. Like she'd been waiting a long time to say those words and finally found a use for them. The recording ended. I sat in Marcus's van for 45 seconds without speaking. Outside, I could hear the venue's valet team calling instructions to each other across the lot. How many people know? I asked. On their side? I don't know. Ours? Just you. I looked at the dashboard. Then I asked the question I needed the answer to before I could think clearly about anything else. Did you know before 2 days ago? Any of it? Marcus shook his head. I would have told you the same day. I believed him, which meant I had one real ally in that building tonight. And he was sitting next to me in a delivery van wearing his work uniform while I was dressed for a gala. Thank you, I said. I mean that. I know what it took to tell me this. He nodded once. Then, what are you going to do? I opened the car door. Go enjoy the appetizers, I said. You're on the guest list. I added you last week. He blinked. What? You've been with this company since before it was a company. You were always going to be on that list. I stepped out and smoothed my dress. Give me about 2 hours. I walked back into that building and I smiled at every single person who came through those doors. The thing about being the person who built something is that you know exactly where every load-bearing wall is. I had spent 5 years learning every contract, every supplier relationship, every clause in every agreement tied to Hartwell Bakeries. Not because I was paranoid, because my grandmother had built the original business on a handshake and a prayer, and when I inherited it, I swore I would never be in a position where someone could take something from me because I hadn't read the fine print. Except I had trusted the one person I thought was reading it alongside me. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone all through the cocktail hour. Not the money, not the equity. The fact that he had watched me pour 5 years of my life into this business, watched me drive to the kitchen at 6 in the morning, handle the supplier crisis in the middle of our anniversary dinner, cry exactly twice in the bathroom at work and think no one saw me, and he had decided, at some point, that the most useful thing I was to his family was a woman who didn't read past the first page. I stood in that room, and I smiled and I answered questions about the new locations and the catering expansion and whether we were planning a franchise model, and the whole time I was running calculations. The restructuring document had transferred equity. But equity is not operations. 3 years ago, when I renegotiated our supplier contracts after our original flour distributor went under, I had insisted on a clause in every major contract that required dual authorization for continuity of service during any ownership transition. My attorney had said it was unusual. I told her to put it in anyway. Every vendor, every distributor, every wholesale client agreement we'd signed since then carried a version of that clause. My name was on every single one. Not the LLC my mother-in-law had set up. Mine, personally. Controlling equity could transfer, but without signed confirmation from the original authorized party, no vendor was required to continue service, no distributor was obligated to fulfill standing orders, and no wholesale client was locked into automatic renewal. They had taken the building. They had left me the foundation. My husband found me near the end of the cocktail hour. He looked exactly as he always did at events, relaxed, charming, comfortable in a room full of people who were impressed by him. He kissed my cheek and said I looked beautiful and asked if I'd had a chance to try the new lemon tarts. They're incredible, I said. You should get one before they're gone. He smiled like a man who had already won. At 9 o'clock, he took the microphone. He thanked the guests. He talked about the growth trajectory, the new locations, the catering partnerships. He said the word family 11 times. I counted. Then, he introduced the new ownership structure with a kind of practiced warmth that sounds spontaneous if you haven't spent 5 years watching someone rehearse sincerity. My mother-in-law was at a table near the front, pearls and composure, watching with the expression of someone whose plan is unfolding on schedule. My husband called me up beside him. He talked about my vision, my creativity, my incredible instinct for brand. He announced my new title, Creative Director, with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a gift. He put his arm around my waist. In my ear, just below the range of the microphone, he said, "Be gracious. We'll talk through everything tomorrow." The room applauded. I smiled into the applause. I thanked everyone for being there. I said something about my grandmother that was true and made 3 people visibly emotional. I raised my glass to the company, to the team, to the future. Then I excused myself to the restroom, sat in a stall for 4 minutes, and started drafting emails on my phone. Pain is an interesting thing. It doesn't always arrive as noise. Sometimes it arrives as precision. By the time I got home that night alone, because I told my husband I needed to ride with our event coordinator to handle the vendor closeout, I had sent 7 emails, 3 to suppliers, 2 to wholesale clients, 1 to our regional distributor, and 1 to the investment group my mother-in-law had apparently been cultivating for the past 4 months, who had been in that room tonight, who had shaken my hand and said they were very excited about the direction. The emails were professional, measured. They did not accuse anyone of anything. They simply noted that per the continuity clauses in our service agreements, I had not yet provided written authorization for the transfer of operational relationships to the new ownership entity and requested a brief hold on any automatic renewals or shipment processing until formal due diligence could be completed. I signed each one as the original authorized party. Then I made tea, took off my heels, and sat at the dining table until 2 in the morning going through every document in the company's digital file system which I still had full access to, because no one had thought to change my administrative credentials. They had announced a transition. They had not completed one. By 7 the next morning, the calls started. Not to me, to my husband. I know because I could hear him pacing in the kitchen while I was still in the bedroom, voice low and clipped, the specific register of a person trying to manage something that is expanding faster than they can contain it. At 7:42, our primary flour supplier emailed him requesting confirmation from the original signatory before processing the week's standing order. That was my clause, the one my attorney had called unusual. At 8:15, the regional distributor sent a formal hold notice, pending authorization. My clause again. At 8:50, the investment group's point of contact replied to my email, not to his. They said they were pausing engagement pending internal review of the governance documentation. His text started at 9:03. We need to talk. Then, Alara, please answer. Then, this is not what you think it is. I was on my second cup of coffee when he came into the kitchen. He looked like a man who had spent the night certain he'd won something and woken up to find the scoreboard had been reset. What did you send them? He said. Not a question. Continuity holds. Standard per our service agreements. You're shutting down operations. I'm pausing automatic renewals until proper authorization is documented. I set my mug down, which is exactly what the contracts require during an ownership transition. I'm following the agreements. You're sabotaging your own company. I looked at him for a moment. It's not my company anymore. You announced that last night. His jaw tightened. We can fix this privately. You made it public. He pulled out a chair and sat down, and for a moment he looked like the person I had married, tired, genuinely unsettled, reaching for something he didn't know how to find. I know you're angry, he said. I understand that. But everything we did was to protect the business long term. My mother's connections, the LLC structure, the capital access. You forged me into a creative director at my own company, I said quietly. At a party I planned. In front of clients I brought in. Silence. Did you ever intend to tell me? I asked. Or was the plan always that I'd find out after it was done and be too invested to walk away? He didn't answer. That's what I thought, I said. He tried 3 more approaches over the next 2 days. Practicality, think about what this does to the quarterly numbers. Guilt, my mother put real capital into this. And finally, late on the second night, something that felt almost like honesty. He sat across from me and said, quietly, that he had genuinely believed it was the right move. That the LLC structure would protect us. That he hadn't thought about how it would feel to find out the way I did. Did you love me? I asked. Or did you manage me? He said both. Like, that was an answer. It was the most honest thing he'd said in 2 years, and it was the last thing I needed to hear. By the end of that week, 3 vendors had submitted formal requests for governance clarification. The distributor had suspended standing orders pending documentation review. The investment group had gone quiet in a way that my attorney recognized immediately as withdrawal. My mother-in-law called on Thursday. She didn't say hello. She said, "You're burning something you built." "I'm auditing something that was taken," I said. "This is family." Then it should have been a conversation. She hung up. His attorney called Friday morning. They wanted to schedule a meeting. Neutral location, she said, to discuss options. I brought my own attorney. We met in a glass-walled conference room in a building that belonged to neither family. My husband sat across from me in a suit I'd helped him pick out 18 months ago. His mother was not there. She had sent representation instead. They opened with a compromise offer, a restructured board with co-equal decision-making, his family's LLC retaining equity but returning operational control. Framed as a peace offering. I let them finish. Then I slid a folder across the table. I'm not here to renegotiate control, I said. I'm here to exit. The room went quiet in a specific way. That meant no one had expected that. Inside the folder was a buyout proposal. Fair market valuation based on the last 3 years of revenue. Clean equity transfer back to a sole proprietorship in my name, or a cash buyout at the assessed value. And attached to the proposal was a compliance filing I had submitted 5 days earlier, not a lawsuit, not an accusation. A formal request for regulatory review of the amended operating agreement, specifically the backdating of my digital signature to a date 14 months prior. I had not accused anyone of fraud. I had simply asked regulators to verify the documentation. If I'm no longer a controlling party, I said, then my signature cannot appear as authorizing a transfer of operational relationships that occurred after the restructuring. If it does appear, and it does, in 4 of the 6 agreements they've already sent to vendors, then there's a legal inconsistency that the compliance office will want to resolve. My mother-in-law's attorney's expression did not change. But my husband looked at the folder like it was something that had reached across the table and taken his hand. You would let this go to regulators, he said. I already have, I said. The question is whether you want to resolve it here or let the review timeline play out. His attorney asked for a recess. They took 40 minutes. When they came back, they approved the buyout. The funds transferred the following Thursday. I filed a public resignation 2 weeks later, not dramatic, just clean. A short statement noting that Hartwell Bakeries was transitioning to new leadership following a change in ownership structure, and that I was pursuing independent ventures. The trade press covered it briefly. A few wholesale clients sent notes. One of our hotel partners asked if I was starting something new and said they'd be interested in talking. I told them to give me 6 months. The day after the transfer cleared, I drove to the east parking lot of the old flagship location and waited. Marcus's van was already there. He'd heard through the staff that something had happened, that things were changing, and he'd texted me 2 days earlier just to say he was around if I needed anything. I got in the passenger seat. It's done, I said. He nodded slowly. You okay? I thought about that. The honest answer was complicated. Something that had been solid for years had turned out to have been hollow in places I hadn't checked. That kind of thing doesn't resolve cleanly even when the practical part does. I will be, I said. What happens now? I handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter of formal reference, written by me, and a bonus check that represented 1% of the total buyout, a number I had decided on before the meeting and held to. Because he had been with that company for 9 years, and he had stood in a cold parking corridor for 11 minutes and hit record when everything in him probably told him it wasn't his place to get involved. He looked at the check for a long time without saying anything. You didn't have to, he said. Yes, I did, I said. You're the reason I walked in there knowing. That changes everything. He folded the envelope carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he said, You're going to start something new, aren't you? It wasn't really a question. Already started, I said. I had registered the new LLC 2 days after the buyout transferred. A different name. A different structure, simpler, tighter. With an operating agreement I had written myself with 3 attorneys reviewing every paragraph. No silent partners. No restructuring clauses. No co-signatories. The hotel partner meeting was scheduled for the following month. I had a concept ready. Not a bakery chain, something leaner, higher margin, with a wholesale model that didn't require retail locations. A production and licensing play. The kind of structure my mother-in-law would have called impractical 18 months ago, before she watched what I did with a bakery I'd inherited in debt. My husband and I filed for separation 30 days after the settlement. We didn't fight about it. By that point, there wasn't enough left to fight over. He moved his things out on a Saturday while I was in a supplier meeting. He texted when he was done. I replied that I hoped it went smoothly. I meant it. Anger takes energy. I had better uses for mine. My sister-in-law sent a message the week after the news went through the family. We'd gotten along well enough during the marriage. She was quieter than her mother, less certain of her positions, the kind of person who follows the current in a family and calls it loyalty. Her message said, "I didn't know the whole plan. I want you to know that." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I believe you. Take care of yourself." Because I did believe her. And because forgiveness and understanding are not the same thing as forgetting how a family operates when it believes you're a resource. The compliance review resolved 4 months later. The regulatory office flagged 2 of the backdated signature entries as inconsistent and required the new LLC to refile with corrected documentation. No criminal charges. No lawsuit. Just a very expensive, very public correction process that required their attorney's involvement for 11 weeks and generated 3 items in regional business press that anyone could find with a simple search. I didn't celebrate, but I noticed. Marcus joined the new company on a contract basis, logistics and delivery coordination for the wholesale operation. He started the same Monday I signed the first hotel agreement. He showed up 15 minutes early. Keys in hand, the same as always. Some people think being strategic and being honest are opposite things. They're not. The most strategic thing I ever did was refuse to pretend I was fine with something I wasn't. The most honest thing I ever did was decide that exiting cleanly was worth more than winning publicly. They thought they had restructured around me. They hadn't understood that everything they wanted to restructure was built on choices I had made, clauses I had written, relationships I had cultivated over 5 years of 6 a.m. starts and dinners interrupted by supplier calls, and one very important Tuesday afternoon when I asked my attorney to add something unusual to a contract. You can transfer equity on paper. You cannot transfer the decade of decisions that made it worth something. I don't think about that gala often. When I do, the part that stays with me isn't the moment he put his arm around me at the microphone or the applause from people who thought they were celebrating something I'd agreed to. It's the parking lot, the east side, the October cold and a drugstore pair of earbuds and a man who hit record because something in a tone of voice told him his employer needed to know the truth. That's the thing about loyalty. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in a parking lot with keys in hand and asks what time the first delivery goes out. I don't manage other people's visions anymore. I build my own. And I know exactly who I build them with.